A new analysis of taxes across the country has unsurprisingly revealed that rich people have rigged our tax codes so badly that in 4 out of every 5 states, the top 1% are actually paying a lower tax rate than everyone else. Now, this is according to a report by the Nonpartisan Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, which is titled, Who Pays? The answer, of course, is all of us instead of the rich. Now, instead of taxing wealthy residents an equal share, the analysis found that the vast majority of states are filling their budget gaps with taxes that disproportionately burden lower income families. These are what we call regressive taxes because they impact the people who are least able to pay them, instead of being progressive, which goes after people who make way more money. So when regular people complain about their taxes being too high, this is why. This is why. Or when they complain about not having enough money left over after buying groceries and things, and that's because they get taxed on consumption. So now on the messaging, though, the blame seems to always go to Democrats, but in reality, it's red states that are gouging the poor and middle class the most with these consumption taxes. I mean, look, you always hear about New York City, California, which do have high taxes, by the way, but in reality, the most regressive systems are in these red states, mostly red states. For example, the top 10 states with the most regressive systems, they are unsurprisingly Florida, Washington, Tennessee, Pennsylvania, Nevada, South Dakota, Texas, Illinois, Arkansas, and Louisiana. So there's a bit of a mixture here. Again, you hear of Illinois, which is Chicago, a blue state. Well, they've got some pretty regressive tax systems. Now, in those states, they found that the middle 60% of families pay an average of twice as much on their income in taxes as the top 1%. So, look, I have an explanation as to why you do see some blue states mixed in there, because it turns out that there are Democrats that also work for their wealthy donors and ensure that corporations pay less, which means that they have to make up the money somehow to do some of the programs, and so that falls to middle and lower income Americans. Now, the poorest 20% of residents end up paying an average of 3 times as much in taxes as the very wealthiest. And it gets worse. And it turns out in a total of 34 states, they tax low-income households at a higher rate than any other group, every other group. So you have the people that can afford it the least are the ones that are getting absolutely hosed, while rich people get break after break after break and keep more of their money. So as I mentioned, how do they do this? It's through consumption taxes, taxes on rents, goods and services, sales, fuel, and property taxes. That has a higher impact on people who are low and middle income. The reason they do this is because most of these states have weakened or eliminated personal income taxes, so they can say, look at us, we have such low taxes, come to our state. In 44 states, the tax code actually worsens income inequality because the top 1% are left with a much larger share of their income after taxes than everyone else. And so this is a countrywide problem. Turns out there's no state in this country that actually has a progressive tax system. It's all regressive. It all helps the rich. Now, who's the most regressive? You're not going to be surprised that it's Florida.
Florida's ground zero for the nursing home. I mean, we're God's waiting room.
And apparently the most regressive state when it comes to taxes, the one where the rich get away with pretty much everything. And look, they have it because the Republican legislature has repeatedly slashed corporate tax rates and hiked sales taxes to make up for it. And the Democratic Party, I mean, where are they in Florida? They're a mess. They're missing. MIA. You might as well put them on a milk carton. They're not there. They're not competitive whatsoever. I mean, it would be really easy to craft a message here saying, hey, you know why you're paying more in taxes than rich people? Republicans. But Democrats in Florida also have to be the ones to say, oh, we're actually going to fight against corporations getting tax cuts. And I don't know if the Florida Democratic Party is willing to do that. or a lot of Democratic parties across the country. And so that is an issue because, again, it's them working for their corporate donors. That said, look, Florida, they've cut their corporate tax rates, they've hiked sales taxes to make up for their budget shortfalls, and of course, it's still not enough. So what they're doing, though, and it's not just in Florida, as I mentioned, all over the country, they've enriched CEOs at the expense of everyone else. Now, you would think that, of course, these companies, in return, would lower prices or pay their employees more. But they don't. Of course not. Or, no. Instead, companies, and they also don't hire more. They hire only enough people that they need. And they pay them as low as possible. And what do they do with the extra money then that they're saving in taxes? Stock buybacks. Stock buybacks, and of course, making sure that they pay their executives more. They also take a big chunk, though, and pay off our politicians. And they are able to get special breaks, for example, with capital gains. So now many states permit taxpayers to deduct their federal income and capital gains taxes. Now that, of course, disproportionately benefits the ultra-rich because they're the only ones pretty much who have capital gains. Okay. And, of course, the politicians, they get bribed. And, of course, the bribes make it so that no politician on either side, or very few of them, will actually fix this. Now, look, to be fair, Massachusetts has actually done a lot to try to bring this back into balance, where now they have a situation where they do have a certain wealth tax, and so rich people pay a little bit more now than middle and lower income. And there are states that, like Vermont, that are also working to try to stop that disparity, to make it so that rich CEOs do end up paying their fair share and actually pay more like they're supposed to, as opposed to making the burden fall on the poor and middle income. But there's a long, long way to go, okay? And there's a lot of opposition. For example, Arizona recently passed a voter-approved tax in the state's top 1% of income earners. That would have raised about $1 billion annually to fund education. Wow, that would have been great, because Arizona has some issues. They have some of the lowest teacher pay and per student spending in the nation. But, of course, a court had killed it. Why? It's because the state said the new revenue would put schools over the spending cap that was put in to the law. So, wait a minute. That cap ensures that, once again, there's very little spending in schools. Okay, they have the lowest teacher pay and per student spending in the country, all right, because of that cap. And so when voters are like, hey, we would like to put in a measure to tax rich people to fund our schools, they're like, no, we can't. We put in the cap. Nothing we can do because we passed a cap to put it in there to make sure that we continue to not fund education. So even when the voters try to fund education, they're not allowed to because of rich people getting their tax cuts. Wow. So that's the situation. That's what it's about. It's about protecting rich donors, the wealthy donors that have bought a lot of our state governments and have bought our federal government. This report shows that we are a completely backwards nation, that we are going after the poorest people. And Republicans, for the most part, are the ones that have pushed this. Look, Republicans, it's another reason why they continue to try to defund the IRS. Okay? Because the IRS, when they're funded, they're actually supposed to go after the rich, the tax cheats. But when they're underfunded, guess who they go after? Poor and middle class people, the people who can least afford it. Because they don't have the resources to fight the IRS. Whereas rich people have tons of resources. And so trying to deprive the IRS of that funding is just to protect the robber barons. Understand, though, that at the end of the day, what this report means is that when Republicans talk about being the party of lower taxes, it only means lower taxes on the rich. which means higher taxes on you.